Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of you around the world. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kathy Visser-May, CMO of Acumatica, and I will be your host. In today's webinar, I'm excited to welcome John Roskill, CEO of Acumatica, and Cindy Jutras, President of Mint Jutras, an independent research and advisory firm. And they're going to be discussing with us today what makes Acumatica different from other ERP vendors. Cindy and John, welcome. Thanks so much for being here with us today. We have about 20 minutes of content to share with you, and we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. And if you have any questions throughout today's webinar, you can just go ahead and put those into the chat window. All right, let's dive in. As we all know, the ERP market is very mature. Over the last few decades, core functionality has really become table stakes. And most ERP vendors realize that in order to compete today, they have to meet that. And it's also true that many ERP vendors find it very difficult to differentiate themselves. So Cindy, why don't you start off by talking about why you think that is?
Thanks, Kathy. Sure. I think one of the biggest reasons is that the go-to marketing messages that you guys all craft so well a lot of times get distilled down into sound bites or taglines, and if you don't do that, they're overly complex, so nobody understands them. But, you know, after a while, for a lot of us, it starts to all sound the same. And I think another big factor is the fact that it's so easy to say yes to everything on an RFP or a checklist, even when yes means a real stretch. I think it's also the case that on the surface, many solutions look quite similar. You have to remember that those that do demos for a living can make anything look easy. And then finally, unless you fully understand the technology under the covers, the potential advantages or disadvantages of the architecture really remains hidden. And let's face it, most business people that are looking at new solutions today aren't and have no inclination to be technologists.
Great. Thanks, Cindy, for that. As we've discussed, most solutions look quite similar on the surface. John, could you tell us a few of your favorite reasons and why you think Acumatica is different?
All right, well, I'll start by pleading guilty for the industry of all the faults that Cindy flagged. But, you know, I think the reasoning is correct, right, which is you trying to tell a story but at an altitude that people can consume it. But Acumatica from the start was really taking a different approach from many of the other vendors out there, and in the end, I think actually is quite unique. You know, it starts with building on a platform, and we'll talk more about what we mean by a platform because a lot of people talk about a platform, but you know, a modern cloud platform. And what that allows us to do is, first of all, make the solution accessible from any device anywhere. You know, whether that's a computer, whether it's a tablet in a warehouse scenario, whether it's running through an airport on a phone. The second one is a deployment model that's very flexible. We can deploy into a public cloud or a private cloud environment. Modern consumption-based licensing. Most ERP companies are still stuck in the 90s with a user-based model, and that has advantages to it for the vendor, but from a consumer standpoint, you really want to be moving to where most of the modern cloud solutions are at this point, which is paying for what you actually use, and that's what we mean by consumption-based licensing. And then lastly, this is going to be the system that becomes the system of record for your business. And so it's very important that it's able to integrate with the other key components across your business so you don't wind up with islands of technology. And Acumatica has been very focused since early days on connecting what we call a connected cloud, being able to work with whatever else you have in your shop.
Great, Cindy. So could you give us your perspective and thoughts on this as we think about this transition and what you see happening in the industry?
Sure. Let's start with the concept of cloud, because John mentioned the cloud platform, and I think we need to distinguish here between cloud and software as a service, because in terms of differentiation, accessing a solution from any place, any time tends to be more of a function of the cloud than SaaS. And by cloud, I mean, web-enabled. So I just want to take a moment and distinguish between those two. We all, myself included, fall into the trap of using the terms interchangeably, but there are some subtle and not so subtle differences. Cloud refers to access to computing, software, storage of data over a network, and let's face it, that's generally the internet. You may have purchased a license for the software. You may have even installed it on your own computers or those, owned by a third party, but your access is through the internet, therefore through the cloud, whether it's a private or public cloud. Now, SaaS is exactly what the acronym says. Software is delivered only as a service. You never deliver it on a CD or any other kind of media. You don't load it on your own computers or someone else's computers, and you generally pay for it based on a subscription, and it doesn't reside on your computers at all. Now, I think that, the public perception and the acceptance of cloud and SaaS has changed very dramatically over the last several years. In fact, I've been doing, I just hit next and I remembered to make one important point. All SaaS is cloud computing, but not all cloud computing is SaaS. And I would argue that cloud gets you a lot of benefits, of which Acumatica has taken advantage of. SaaS gets you more benefits, and in fact, Acumatica has also taken advantage of that. But what's, it's the classic multi-tenant SaaS solution, which brings a lot of benefits to you as well as Acumatica. Now, let's step back a minute, because we're talking about differentiation here, and I think one of the things that does differentiate Acumatica is the fact that even though it was born in the cloud, it's not necessarily only ever and exclusively offered in a public cloud solution. Why that's important is because unlike other born-in-the-cloud solutions that only offer it that way, we have to recognize that back when Acumatica was born, and some of these other SaaS solutions were born, the perceptions about cloud and SaaS were very different. Way back when, 10 years ago, nobody was really successful in this business because they were a multi-tenant SaaS solution. Back 10, 12 years ago, when I started doing research, you had to be successful in spite of that, because many people wouldn't even consider a SaaS solution. So I think Acumatica was smart in the beginning to not stifle their growth, because the rest of the world hadn't caught up with the perception of SaaS being a good thing. Now, what you're seeing today is on the screen is the results that I capture in an annual survey. I've been asking this question for 12 years. The question is, if you were to consider a solution today, not only those that are considering, but if, hypothetically, you were considering a solution today, what deployment options would you consider? And we give the options of software as a service, and I define that so it's clear. hosted and managed by your solution vendor. In this case, that would be Acumatica or one of its partners, or hosted and managed by an independent third party. Think of it as the old kind of hosted and managed facility kind of model. Traditional licensed on-premise, and then in 2015 I added another option, which was a hybrid of on-premise and cloud solution. Now, back when I first started asking the question, the percentage that would even consider SaaS was less than 10%, wasn't even double digits. And those that would consider a traditional licensed on-premise solution was up in the high mid-90s. Obviously, that's not the case today. I'm showing you every other year pretty much since 2011, and you'll see that as of about 2013, those that were looking for a cloud-based solution, hosted or SaaS, dominated. Between about 2011 to 2013, those that would even consider a traditional licensed on-premise solution fell over a cliff, and it's not recovered since, and I don't expect it to recover. So you can see the perceptions and the sentiment has changed very dramatically. Being a SaaS-enabled solution is not as clear a differentiator as it used to be. It's still somewhat differentiated that you offer all of these different options in the exact same solution. One of the things I will point out, and that's in the box there, is we had a second question. You could select all of these or one of these in that first question. What I did was I displayed back the options that would be considered, and I asked which one would be the first choice. And you'll notice that for those that will consider a SaaS solution, 81%, it's their first choice.
Yeah, and that's very consistent with us, our results here too, Cindy. I mean, over the last 5 years, we've seen our cloud subscription offering just skyrocket, and to the point now where it's over 90%. I think the large driver behind that has been, this is the system of record for a company, the ERP system. And unlike other systems, if the ERP system's down, you can't run the company. You can't take orders. You can't pay your employees. And so it's something where customers had to build the confidence in the cloud solutions, the SaaS solutions. Being able to offer an alternative deployment model, so there are certain cases that we're getting into where either very high transaction volume scenarios where you actually want to have the ERP system next to the e-commerce web-facing engine, or some compliance-related industry hooks, so specifically healthcare, where most public cloud options can't support HIPAA compliance, for instance. So being able to offer an alternative is a very useful thing to still have. But let's talk about other scenarios like phone and tablet.
Yeah, and I think the access through the cloud, that's certainly a requirement if you're going to start to operate off of a phone or a tablet. And I think the demand for that is reflective of today's culture of connectivity. Whether you're a remote worker, a traveling executive, a repair technician out in the field, or even just a manufacturing supervisor that's walking around the shop floor, they're carrying tablets today. They're not carrying the old clipboard. So you really need that browser-based kind of connectivity. Excuse me. And also, we're starting to see some demand for other kinds of devices. You'll see those on the right there. The Siris and the Alexas and the Google Home and, all of those kinds of interaction. I think it's really changing the climate and the perception of how we communicate and interact with each other, and also how we communicate and interact with the systems.
Absolutely. I mean, Acumatica was an early embracer of mobile technology, and it's not just the same screen for the same device. It's being able to take advantage of some of the unique capabilities, and the mobile apps that we deliver allow our customers to do that. But we are, as you said, seeing people take it further. Some of the advanced point-of-sale work that's being done, for instance, it's very often you'll go into boutique stores now and you'll see the sales reps walking around with iPads ready to take your order. And, as you mentioned on some of the new voice-activated devices, or what they call natural language interface in the industry, Acumatica was the first ERP to do a demonstration of integration with the Amazon Alexa device and being able to check inventory levels or being able to do approvals. And we think that's a very interesting sort of future scenario. Like I believe your next slide talks about some of the data on this, and this is something that we're seeing just starting to emerge, where the sort of most forward-looking customers of ours are thinking about how can I use this in a manufacturing environment where they want to be hands-free potentially, or mobile. People are driving and being able to talk to their devices. So I don't know if you have any other comments on that.
And I think you're right, John. The one thing you have to recognize, though, is the reason I put this slide here is to show you, think of a virtual assistant like a Siri or an Alexa or something like that. And, I asked about investment levels and planned activity, and you'll notice the biggest column there by far is no plans, no activities. But that doesn't concern me. I think what that means is that companies like Acumatica have to basically give a gentle push to the enterprise. Think about how Siri and Alexa and Cortana and all the others came into being. The consumer didn't ask for it. They didn't say, I'm not going to buy an iPhone unless I can ask a question of a virtual assistant like Siri. No, instead, the technology companies had forethought enough to say, look at this cool thing that we can do, and they pushed it out to the consumer, and pretty soon, half the millennials on the planet can't live without it. I can't necessarily say that for baby boomers, but it's become so embedded in our society. But it takes a forward-thinking company like Acumatica to kind of make that available so that it's sort of a gentle push out in order to make a big difference. And I think part of the other factor is, it's really about employee engagement with the application. When you think about it, years ago, and sure enough, back in 2006, 2007, when I asked what percentage of employees use ERP, it was, maybe 20%. It was a select number of individuals in the organization. It was either heads down data entry clerks or it was super users, but the general population didn't have access to ERP and therefore didn't have the advantages, didn't have access to the data, didn't have the connectivity that you can have today. You can see I've got 2015 to 2018 here, and we saw a big jump from 2015 to 2016, and it kind of settled back a little. The reason I think it took a dip is because in 2016 and 2017, my survey had a very high percentage of participants that were already running ERP as software as a service. And as you can see, the level of engagement from an employee standpoint rises when you have that access anytime, anywhere, and oh, by the way, from any device doesn't hurt either.
Yeah, we see the same thing. I mean, that's part of the Acumatica, credo, effectively. It's just that you're bringing a system that's for all employees. And I related it earlier to the modern consumption-based pricing. We don't want you as a business owner to have to make a tough decision of whether you're going to spend $1,200 or $1,500 a year to give a person in sales or a person in the manufacturing shop floor access to the system to get information, even if it's only once a day or once a week. And this is a system that's got information in it that's relative to pretty much everybody in the company. And in the situations where we've seen a company that's fully embraced and gone through their digital transformation, everybody in the company is getting value out of the system in one way or another. And it's interesting whether or not they actually know they're using the ERP system, because they could actually be getting the information through our integration with something like Office 365, where we can surface support incidents or outstanding billing issues directly through an email window that's fully integrated. I think we're going to continue to see this go up and up.
And I think you're smart, John, in removing those barriers for the, who says it shouldn't be 100% engagement with ERP. But, as we're moving on, let's move on to the other comment that you made before, which was more around a cloud platform approach. And I'm seeing more and more talk about platforms today, and the reason it's so important is solutions used to be built as these huge monolithic structures that were very difficult to march forward, presenting a lot of barriers to innovation. The right kind of a platform makes the solution open and extensible and a lot more agile, meaning you can accept and consume innovation faster. And one of the keys to that is something called microservices architecture. And for those on the webinar today that aren't familiar with that term, don't be concerned about that. Not everyone calls it microservices architectures, but from a development standpoint, a microservices architecture is an architectural style that structures an application as a collection of loosely coupled services. Think of it as components instead of long strings of monolithic code. For the business user, it's like developing an application with a set of Legos as opposed to a hammer, timber, and nails. Think about how the different Lego components all fit together easily, and if you have to replace part of the structure, you just uncouple it and plug the new one back in. Now, of course, it's not quite that simple, but that's really the concept behind a good, strong, open platform.
Yeah, I think you sized it up well there, Cindy. If we go just and build out this slide here of Acumatica architecture, you see the rectangle in the middle that talks about the Acumatica Cloud XRP platform. And this is the singular platform, and that is unique. We really are the only vendor out there right now running all of our modules on top of a single platform. Most of the competitors have done acquisitions and how they got their different manufacturing or field service capabilities. And the result of that, it's not actually running on the same aligned platform. The reason why that's important is because if you're doing business process and workflow underneath these modules like field service or CRM or distribution, having a common workflow engine makes things much smoother, much easier to work with. And so this is the architecture that we've built out. It scales extremely well. We have customers that are running as small as a few hundred transactions a week to customers that are doing 20,000 transactions in an hour. And if you scale that out or multiply that out, it's over 1 million transactions in a week. So very, very flexible, very scalable. And to bring that back to the consumption-based pricing, you just are paying for what you use. And so if you're doing a small number of transactions, you're not paying a lot of money. And if you're doing 1 million transactions, your business is probably doing so well that you're not worrying that you're spending a little bit more on your computing power. So the last point on this, which is the open interfaces that Cindy mentioned. Everything we've done at Acumatica is completely based around open industry standards, and this allows us to integrate with all of the leading cloud vendors that are out there. So folks like Avalara from Tax, I mentioned Microsoft and Office 365, but we've done integrations with Salesforce and Adobe and many others, and that's an important part of that. And then we're also seeing a lot of vendors that have specific expertise in certain industries coming in and starting to work with us to take Acumatica in those directions. And I think that's the last section that we want to talk about. So let me throw it back to you, Cindy.
Sure, and I think that I see the benefits of a good, strong platform twofold. One is agility, which I think we've already touched on, but the other is last mile functionality. And, for years, for decades, everyone viewed the 80-20 rule as being the important aspect. But, 80% isn't enough anymore. You really need that last mile of functionality to really be competitively differentiated in your customers to be competitively differentiated. And let's face it, one size doesn't fit all. So you need that functionality that's able to plug in for that last mile. But you don't want an electronics manufacturing stumbling over something like catch weights that process industries needs. So those types of things fits well in terms of this platform. So basically it allows you to invest in the technology for openness, for extensibility, and not let that core get in the way of more functionality.
Absolutely, and then we're seeing a number of our partners. Acumatica has over 350 partners in North America, and many of them are taking it into specific micro verticals. And so, that could be anything from power plant operations to hotel management to the running cannabis businesses. So I think that kind of covers the material we wanted to get at today. Let me hand it back to Kathy, and I think we can take a few questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much, Cindy and John. Really informative, good discussion. We do have some questions coming in. I think, Cindy, there was just a couple of things that you wanted to leave us with in terms of your parting thoughts before we jump into the Q&A.
Yeah, I think I'd make some recommendations to anyone that's on the call. The first is really don't fall into the trap of thinking that all ERP solutions are alike or even that similar today. Fit and functionality is very important. 80% fit is no longer the standard. You need to address that last mile of functionality. But it's also wise to look beyond the typical checklist of features and functions. Don't just ask if it's supported, ask to see it, or even better, put your own hands on the system, because trust me, it will look and feel a lot different when you're in the driver's seat than when you're watching an expert show you how it's done. It's very important to do due diligence in evaluating different solutions. You also need to look at the underlying technology, and if you're a smaller company and don't have that kind of expertise on board, don't be afraid to bring in an external consultant that will help you objectively evaluate the underlying platform. And, whether you want to deploy it on premises in a private cloud or a public cloud, look for cloud capabilities, because that will give you the access anytime from anywhere. And, don't necessarily just look for a mobile device interface. Most anyone can do that. Does it support the native features of the mobile device? And is it tailored to operating on a mobile device, rather than just lifting and shifting a desktop experience? And finally, will the Then ask the question whether vendor will be challenged to support you or whether they will challenge you to take full advantage of new and better technology.
Great, thanks, Cindy. So we do have a question here coming from San Jose. Meredith is asking, John or Cindy, you talked a lot about mobility today. Can you really get a lot of work done on a phone? What's your perspective on how companies should really be thinking about where they use the mobile aspect of this in their business?
Sure. Well, I'll jump in and just say, as we run Acumatica on Acumatica, so as a business executive, I'm on the road probably 40 or 50% of the time, and I can do almost everything I need to do using the Acumatica mobile application. So discount approvals, sales order approvals, purchase orders, all of that I can do on the phone. So I think if you went into the core accounting group here at Acumatica, they would tell you that they're, if they're in a jam, they can do what they need to do. But I would say pure accounting probably wants to be on a bigger screen. But most other roles, I think, can start moving to mobile devices. And another good example of that is in-field service. We've got a very nice field service app that lets you track your routes for your drivers, dynamically reroute, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I go back and just say it depends on the role a little bit, but I think more than 90% will be able to get stuff done on mobile devices. So thanks for the question.
Great. Okay, we also have a question from David from Cohen Company, and he is saying many of our customers have customizations built into the software they use, as that gives them a competitive advantage in the industry. Is the software and database accessible?
So in Acumatica's standpoint, absolutely. Direct access to the database is something generally we discourage people from doing, but Acumatica, as I said, is fully open standards-based APIs, and so if people want to go all the way down to the bare metal, we will help them do that if that's what they want. As we talked about our platform, that's where the customizations typically happen. It's very easy to do high-level form customizations, change fields, put custom scripts in there, and that's something that even power users can do inside Acumatica. But when you start getting into full-blown workflow-level customizations, the sort of things that likely are the business differentiators that you were asking about, writing those in a modern language with a modern API set in like Acumatica becomes much more straightforward. And so, probably 90% of our customers are coming to us from a legacy platform, legacy Infor, legacy Sage, legacy Dynamics, and some percentage coming from frustration with other cloud ERP vendors as well. And we've been able to bring all of those over with our partners, get their customizations up and working, and actually, that's usually the starting point. The thing that gets exciting is where they can go from there, because what I've learned is the businesses that are really on top of what they want to do and like how they want to use computing systems to drive their business, you're never done. There's always the next thing. That's working, great. We've got all of shipping automated. What are we going to do next? So anyway, next question.
Great. One final question. Will a recording of this be sent out for sharing? So yes, absolutely. Everyone on the call today, you'll get a direct link to the recording of the webinar, and it will also be available on Acumatica.com. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you liked what you heard and you want to learn more, we are making a free copy available of the Mint Juchas report. Cindy walked through some of this data today, and we hope that you all find it useful. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye, everyone.